Good afternoon, everyone. You might be questioning why, or you might have some questions why I am into development, community well-being, when in fact I am with human kinetics. I'm also, my field of specialization in the past was into dance, but of course I did not forget dance as being part now of our field, also in our agenda in the Department of Human Kinetics, where we go more into community well-being. So I have this big umbrella, the well-being of a community, and I could start with exercises, dance, and this time I'll go into index in how to come up with a well-being. So, in everything that we do, in every program that we are getting in or proposing, we always want to end with development for human well-being. So we want to put focus or put premium on well-being for human. Okay? So with that, as a context in my paper this afternoon, this is about, the context is within the situation of natural disasters. Right? So what is well-being to us? What is community well-being to us? So it varies within context. So for example, if you do not have disasters in your locality, perhaps your values will be different. And it could be strong, or moderate, or it also becomes low. So this afternoon, I would like to tell you the story of how I came up with Community Well-being Index. So if we go back to our literature and our authorities when it comes to disasters, I could start with using Bangkok in 2003. He mentioned that the state of the Philippine environment in the new millennium is not encouraging. Yes, of course, we know all the problems that we have, the social problems, environmental problems, and all the problems we can think about. So within the present inequalities in the society, he was driving at how prepared you are for a disaster. And if disaster always comes, they will always come and they will go. But how are you prepared? So for example, we know that those who are more or less rich, those who have the capacity to prepare well, will have a lesser impact when it comes to disaster. So we're looking at the vulnerable sector, especially for our trust here in the community. We want to look at how we would be of help to the vulnerable sector of our society. So moving on, if we go back, sorry, there's a typo error there. If we go back to our own country, we know that our country is very susceptible to natural calamities or other calamities for that. Now, it so happened that we have, average in a year, we have 20 tropical cyclones, and 8 or 9 made some landfalls. And we know for a fact that if it would have a landfall to us in our country, we can feel the impact of it. So what is community well-being then? So that's a scenario for this paper, this afternoon's talk. It's about a context after a disaster that happens to us. Because you see, we could not stop disasters to come, and we're also preparing for that disaster. All of our local leaders, local government leaders are preparing for that. The academy is also preparing for that, and all the NGOs are preparing for that. But how come, or how do we do this when we have all prepared and there are times that we still feel the brunt of a disaster? So we look at this, like in my case, in my paper, I'm looking at it that the disaster has been there, and what is now? What will happen to us now? So I'm looking at how I measure the people there after a disaster that happened to a locality. So if I go back to this definition, this was a nice resource for me, a nice material for me, and it was given to me by a dear friend from CIPAF, and he's around here. And that was, the author of this was Lee et al. In 2015. So from that book, I was so lucky to get that book. And it was there where I have more or less conceptualized what will I look into, what would be the dimensions, or what would be the indicators I'll be looking at if I'll talk about community well-being. So according to authors, we have, it's a combination of social, economic, environmental, cultural, and political conditions. So you have these conditions. What are the conditions present in that locality? And so all of these two are being identified by individuals and their communities as essential for them. So the statement was there, it's essential for them to flourish. So you see, all our leaders would like to look at us or would like to give us enabling environments. So we look at this, how do we flourish? How would a community being devastated by a disaster would soon get up, would soon go back to its own feet, and in order to fulfill their potential. So it started from there. So I have to look at some indicators or some variables that would look at that these are essential to the people, and this kind of variables that if you give them and you give them a maximum ability in order to sustain it, so then there's a flourishing, and then the potential for men are being accomplished. So it's a big, and sometimes it would tell us it's a motherhood statement of how can you have this quality well-being in our country or in our community. So let's move on. So why do we need this? So number one, when I was proposing for my dissertation, it was really like my academic advisor always tell me, what is that to us? What is that to community development? What is that to policymakers? So it becomes possible to monitor changes in CWB. So remember, community well-being is the main thrust, the main advocacy here. So we want them, maybe you can refer like, what is well-being to me now, personally? What is well-being? Am I happy? Yes. So do I have that well-being? Maybe. So am I satisfied with what I have now? What conditions do I have now? So am I satisfied? How would I be able to help? So I'm really satisfied. So I have a perfect well-being. So let's look at this. So we want to monitor changes in one place, and we want to find out whether those changes are alarming or are good or bad. So I'm proposing for an index to measure that. So it's just like having your grades. You want to find out whether you're doing well in your school, in your classes. You look at the grades you have, right? That's number one. That could be one. Because of course, community well-being index is not the only thing to measure success or satisfaction in a community, just like our grades. It's not the only thing in measuring your success. So the main objectives for this paper is to develop community well-being tools. So these become tools for policymakers. Like for example, you have this kind of value, then what is it? So if you want to excel, like for example your grades, and go back to your grades, and you want to get all as flat 1, then that's your grades will become your tool. In this case, is the index here, the values in the index. And then I would like also to determine the community well-being index in disaster-prone areas as being affected as my sample in the case study. Okay, so for the area of study, our country, you can choose anywhere in our country, and I'm sure any disaster can happen there. So in the case of my study, we started like, of course you know that here, this place here, this area here is facing the Pacific Ocean. And how many times would those Pacific Ocean start to come up with a disaster for us, like typhoon, the storms. It always starts from there, right? It always starts from there. So I started with, of course, not only typhoon for us. In this case, it's for Leyte, for this matter, for the case study, it's in the province of Leyte. Now, in Albay, where it's also being affected by any typhoon coming there, and I'm taking Albay for a case for volcanic eruption. And then in 2015, it was very recent for the strong earthquake that happened in Buot. That's why it was also included in Buot. So I have 3 kinds of disasters here. I'm applying the same kind of index in those 3 areas, and we'll find out. Okay, so that's the area of study. But how do I choose the area of study? It was number 1 because of its proximity to the case, to the problem of disaster. All right. So methodology. This is what we call the pragmatic approach. Remember the pragmatic approach? Some people would call this the mixed methods. Yes. So pragmatic approach because you want to be clear. You want to not to stick to the rule like this is the first step, this is the second step. In a pragmatic approach, you can do this simultaneously or one after another. In my case, I did this sometimes simultaneously, sometimes one after the other. So it's up to us. It's up to us to give a good reason why you are doing this kind of tool. So I also use qualitative approach, like for example the FGD and the KII. You have the qualitative data there to be processed. And then the quantitative approach. So there were two main approaches, qualitative and quantitative. And I'm using also secondary data. Right. So so in the qualitative data, we always have like the focus group discussion. In the study, there were several group discussions that I did because of, remember there were 3 places, and so in every place, like there were more or less like 10 to 12 focus group discussions. And then the key informant interview were done, the interviews were done for the weightings. Let's go back to the slides. So how did I choose the sample size? It was purposely chosen based on its proximity to cases. Okay, so you would say it was not a sample random choice of what would be the place. It was purposive because we have to remember its proximity to the disaster that I was measuring, I was looking at. So, but then the next is, among those provinces, for example, if you go to Albay, there are several provinces in Albay, okay? So what would be the, no, not province, the towns, the bayan. So what would be the bayans, the towns that I would be included in the study? So what I did, one town, one municipality would be representative for Albay. So how did we do that? We had this random sampling now for choosing the municipality that would represent your Albay. So I went also to Bohol, and that's the same thing that we do. So we had the sample random technique in choosing the municipality. The next is, it was purposive again in getting the barangay. So you would ask, so if it's purposive, I could not make some quantification of that. Well, in this case, when I was choosing the barangay, it was purposive because I was looking at the list per municipality. They gave me like, these are the 3 barangays that were mostly highly affected by the disaster. So I have that justification for my reviewer later on for the journals. Right? And then systematic random sampling in the selection of respondents. Now, once I know the barangays that would be chosen, that would be included in the survey, then we had the systematic random sampling. Everybody knows the systematic random sampling where you have, it's either you use the simple random sampling again, but in my case I was using the systematic random sampling where you have, you count the number of houses, like for example if you have 1, 2, 5, on the 5th you start, and then after that you go on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again, and so on. But of course you can modify that, because what if 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ang layo na po niya. The next house is too far away. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5th house is very, very far away. So it would cost you much time and money. So in that case, you can justify like, I just need to have 1 on the 3rd house. As long as you have a systematic random sampling. If you do that, then do that for the entire barangays for that locality. Alright, then the next is, how did I only have the minimum number of respondents for, in my case, because I want to come up with an index, was only 17. Yes. I was using only 70. That was being computed by the G-power analysis. It's a free program. You can access that. And the G-power analysis gave me only as the total N for that analysis. I only need to have an N of 70. Okay, the minimum would be 70. Well, in my case, I had some allowances, like I had 74 and some. The enumerators got 73 and so on, as long as I will not go below 70. Okay? The more, the better. But what is the purpose now of having more? When you have the same, when you analyze that, you will have more or less very, very minimal difference there. That's why. If you do not need to have more of respondents because there's no need for you to have, then don't go for the so many respondents. Well, you only have to know what kind of test would I have? What kind of analysis would I have? So, for example, in this, you just get into, if you have that free apps already, then you can just put, what is the effect size that you want? What is the power that they want to have? So I have 0.95. 95% is too high, right? So, what's the probability of me having this good value? Do we have that good value? And then the total sample size, and it will just give you 70. The actual power here is 0.95. It's 95%. The probability that you will, 95% that will bring you to a correct or a justifiable values that you need. Okay, so I was using the G-power analysis. So I was not using the, the usual thing that we do, like we have this computation of some formula, and give you, like, for example, some 300 people. It's too much. Because what I wanted was to get an index. So that would differ with what is the objective of your study. So what were the techniques in the field? Number one, I was having this deductive method. You know for sure that what is deductive. We started from the big one. There's already this published materials. In our literature, there are so many things about disaster. And then there are also a little bit about well-being. So what I did was really to go into reading before we could propose. So for graduate students here and also undergraduate who are planning to have their thesis, it's really needful to have all those materials being kept and being organized so that you can make use of it later on. And then, so I used deductive method. That means I already have the theories. I already have known some indicators, some variables were used by some authorities in the past, in recent past, or just this year. Or of course, you have to look for 2000 and above, the recent materials that we have. All right, so what I did, I have all of this list, and I was going to the field to verify if those lists, those several indicators in our books, in our literature, would be applicable to the specific community that I had. So several FGDs for that, so to arrive at the final indicator. So what we did, I was looking at how they look at well-being. This was the most difficult part, because once you know their concepts about well-being, so easy for you to, well, of course, honestly, creating the instrument was really, it took me a lot of months. But I'm sure some of you are very good in coming up with a survey form, the measurements, the instrument, and it will be better. So practice, practice, practice. So what I did after that several FGDs that we had, and we also had KII, key informal interviews with experts. Experts, why? Because later on I will show you, I was using weights. I was not looking at dividing them equally. Well, there are two kinds of coming up with your index. You can have equal distribution of weights. For example, if you have five main indicators, 5 main dimensions, so 100 divided by 5. So you have 20%, 20% here, 20, and then you have 100%, right? But in my study, I did not use that. There are benefits and there are also, well, disadvantages, but it's up to you to justify your methodology, your tools. And then after that, after the prioritization, then there was the construction of the questionnaire, and of course the test, the validity of and the reliability of the instrument followed. And after that, you have your community survey. Once you have your community survey, it will be very easy for you. But of course, I was with my statistician. I could not do all this without my statistician. Okay, so looking back at the data, so this is how I did it, the proportional distribution of the household. So I have one in Albay, so one community representing Albay, and then I have 3 barangays within that community. And how would you proportionately divide it? You know that, okay? So you get the total population and then divide the 70 and so on. That's very easy. So Buot and also later. So it was only a duplication. But why did I do a duplication? Because we want to verify whether what I have proposed would be applicable to another case. Right? And in table 2, I was telling to you that key informant interviews were also done. When we have key informant interviews, we usually, your advisor would always ask you, or your funding agency would also try to ask you, like, what are the qualities of your key informants? Are these people knowledgeable? They must be knowledgeable. These are experts. But you also justify how they become experts. So they were there during that discussion. They have some authorities. They have some background about what the cases were like, and so on. So in your case, you need just to justify. Hindi lang po, not anybody can become your key informant, right? Especially if you go to qualitative approaches. All right. So this now, I'm coming now into what are the steps. Remember, I'm coming up with an index. I want to walk you through how I made this index. Okay, so I am using, first I have the themes, dimension themes. So these are the umbrella. Or you can also call that there are also other things, no? But in my case, I was calling this as dimension. Now, in our case, community development, we use the community capitals framework. I use that framework. There are 7 capitals actually, but then I'm using only the 5 capitals because I fuse some, like social, cultural, and the human. I fuse that into one. So in my case, in my study, I have 5 dimensions. So once I have my dimensions there, okay, so what are those things? What would be measured in between or in all of those themes, dimensions? For example, what would be my belt capital? These are infrastructure in the community. Okay? So these are belt capital, could be bridges, could be hospitals, all the infrastructures, roads, and so on. Now, financial capital, economic wealth of the community. So what would be included there? So of course, you know, those are what kind of work do we have, income, and so on, right? You know already that. Political capital. So how powerful is your institution? How powerful are the political entity in that community? So how can I say that they're powerful? They are prepared. How do they prepare for that? And so on. So that would be included there. Another one is the social cultural capital, the human labor now. What are its abilities? What are its skills? What are its organizations? Okay, so we include that there. And then the natural capital, in the case natural environment, I was only using one solo factor here, the forest cover. So you would ask me, why only one there and so many on the other dimension? Remember, the forest is encompassing. If you have a very good forest, then you would have a very good supply of water, and you would have, well, livelihood of the people would be enhanced. Why? Because you have a very good forest and so on. So it's encompassing. So I was only using one natural environment dimension indicator there. All right, the second one that I did, after you have the themes, now I'll put into, like there are the 5 umbrellas, big one there, and then inside it, I'm now starting to put the details. What will be placed there? What are the indicators in every dimension? So the belt capital, what could be placed there? Okay, so what do you want to find out? What do you want to know? Like, yes, they have hospitals,
But were the hospitals ready for the disaster? How far was the hospital? How what the road? How long did you take? How long was it for this people who were affected by the disasters reach the hospital or reach some people to help them? Okay, so you can have all of this. So remember, it's a reference point for monitoring and decision making. For stakeholders consultation, so if you have all of these indicators now, to think of an evaluation of, if you want to have an evaluation of your project, then you know, what would be the things that I want to measure? Right? So, what I did, as I have mentioned, FGD, it helped me a lot because I was looking at how personally they look at it. The leaders, the government volunteers, or the teachers with that, and or the students. The students also were included, or the people's organization. Now, some people would ask me also, like, what if I don't have an organization? Would I not be included? Would I not be represented? The answer is yes. If you do not belong to one, then you are not worthy to be measured. Well, in the case of, like, for example, a student, you belong to the education sector. Okay? So if you're in the government sector, if you're the political leaders, then you belong to one. If you're a merchant, then you belong to the business sector. So I think everybody is really accounted for. You just didn't know that they have this membership. Alright, so these are proxies. So when you look at variables, when you look at indicators you want to measure, these are proxies. These are things that might not be present. There are some proxies that are not present in one, but can be represented in one. So you look at the same, like, you average that. What could be a thing that could be represented where, in fact, it was not there in that community, but it could be represented with another variable. So you think about that. So, and then later on, but of course, I would invite everyone to go back to your literature. If you are well-versed, if you have hundreds of readings there, I'm sure you know how to justify your study. Right, and the next one is experts' knowledge and recommendations. And yes, of course, because as I have mentioned, we'll go on into the weights. No? These are recommendations from the experts. These things should be the priority of if you want to be prepared and if you want to be coming back to our needs or our field after the disaster. So with those two considerations, the initial list of my indicators were ready. Okay, so I had the community, I had the experts, and I also had, that's one, and I had also the literature. It's important to have published things to back us up. Alright, so how do you select again? There are thousands of indicators. Okay? So how will you zero in to what you need? Okay, so we call that the low parsimony. So I was also talking to my class, like, how do we go to the community? Why do we include things that we do not need? Okay, so that's low parsimony. So zero in. What are the things that you need most? Because we could not cater to everything that we want to measure in that community. Focus on. So low parsimony. So what we did, using the Pearson's law, the high correlations between individual sub-indicators, you know that in the statistics, right? Some sub-indicators were eliminated. So the first time I did, there were 110 sub-indicators, and when it was run through the Pearson's law, then we finally decided to have 62 for final consideration. I only had 62 indicators now, variables now, to be measured in the next thing was to come up with the measurement, the questionnaire. Alright, so the third phase is the normalization of values. Okay, how do we normalize values? Because there are things that sometimes you ask them, how many children do you have? So they would say 3. And then the next thing you would do is, do you agree, yes or no? So there are different types of questions in your questionnaire. So you need, I normalized all of those values. To normalize it, what we did, what my statistician used was the minimum maximum rescaling scheme. So to rescale, to have more or less uniform values that you need, because you could not include in the analysis like this one is 1, the other one is agree, disagree, right? So we normalize those values. So the minimum maximum rescaling scheme, right? So for indicators that have a positive influence or impact on cognitive well-being, so I have the list there. So if that indicator is positive, then this is the formula. So your y is the normalized value equals x1, the value of what you have observed, minus the minimum value for all observations. For example, you want to normalize the value of the number, what is this? The length of time they spent, the length of time they stayed in the community, like y equals, for example, that one respondent would say, I have been here for 20 years. So 20 minus the minimum, the lowest number of answers there, and all of your respondents, like 5. So 20 minus 5 over, what's the maximum, what's the highest, and so on. So it's very easy, actually, guys. Okay? It's so easy, like, for example, you have the statistician, it can easily be down to you. But of course, you have to guide your statistician. This is what I want to do. This is what you will do. Right? So that's for the positive. Now, the negative one, this is also the formula. So you can do that manually or using your computers and go on. The fourth one, after that, I have the dimension, I have my indicators, I have number 3, I have my, what's number 3? I have normalized it. Now the next one is, I will not determine the weights. Remember, I told you, this is not an average of the weights. Like I have 5 big umbrellas there, so every umbrella has its own weight. So this is now where analytic hierarchical process came in. There are times you can make use of, they use clustering, factor analysis, you can also do that. But in my case, I use the AHP. Based on a pairwise comparison. So I went, but this is where the experts came in. Okay, so they have to decide, which is more a priority to you? A hospital or a theater? Which is more important to you? Going to school or having work now? So they prioritize that. But not only a yes or no, they do not only choose one, but they have to give values. So this is what we did. So it's a scale of 1 to 9. So 1 would be equally important. So if you want to be safe, you say 1, equally important. Both are important to me. I want to go to the mall and I want also to go to the hospital. But remember, this is a context during disaster, after disaster. So we had that. Right, so you would say, how would I be sure that those values are true? The next one is, okay, so we have all of this from SAPI 1987. So he established this, the 1 to 9, where you have to have the priority. So in order to have that, there's a pairwise comparison matrix. You have to come up with a matrix. Okay, so those are certain of the formulas your statistician can do. And you can also actually start to understand it. I have started to understand it. Alright, so after that, after I have the experts, I have their decisions there, we have to look at the consistency ratio. This is important. Now you will find out if the answers, if the value is more than 1, ibig sabihin, that means something was wrong there. There was no consistency of your experts prioritizing the thing. So higher value of 0.10 at any level demands a reassessment. So once you get that CR, consistency ratio of more than 1, it means you have to go back to the field. So be sure to have more or less be careful with your data if you have like this. Careful in explaining to your experts what you want to have. Alright, so consistency ratio, this is the formula there. CI over RI, but then what is CI? Is first you have to look at CI because RI is constant. There are books now you can tell you the RI, but what is CI? So random index is constant, and CI is you have to compute. So for CI, first you have to compute for this. So yeah, lambda minus n over n minus 1. Okay, so it's easy, if you have the calculator or the computer.
So once I have the CI, then I am ready now to compute for my CR. So remember, when you have the AHP, your CR is very important, consistency ratio. Alright, the next one, now in the last phase, this additive aggregation method. Now I'm going to add, so it's simple. No? Just add. Diba? I have 5 umbrellas there, and now I have the weights from AHP. For example, one area would have 18%, 30%, as long as you have 100% for the entire 5 umbrellas, 5 dimensions I have. Now what we'll do is just add A plus B plus C plus D. Ganun lang siya kadali. Alright. So this is now the data analysis. And go back to that. So dimensions to come up with a CWPI. So this is now the formula that I have proposed. I came up with, but it's went through the process that I have mentioned. So the last one was additive. So I started with, number 1, you look for your dimension, and look for dimension. Then I choose the indicators there, of course, after all of those FGDs and KII. And then the third one is normalize the value. Then the fourth one is what we did, look at the weights, okay, prioritization of your experts. And then the fifth one is additive. So you have that. So what is the value for the build capital times the weight for that dimension, plus the value of your financial capital times its weight, and so on. So easy, right? Okay, so let's move on. So these are also the indicators and some sub-indicators I did. What I had one conversation with a very good statistician too, and a published one. He mentioned, in social research, he mentioned that in your every indicator, if you want to be sure that you're coming up with a good instrument, in every indicators that you are listing there, you have to have more or less at least 3 questions or 3 statements there in your questionnaire that would relate to that. Okay, so safe and on. Alright, so I have all of these indicators and sub-indicators, and as I have mentioned to you, using the Pearson's law, it was brought down to 65. Alright, now, having all of those, having this kind of formula, and having all of those values, then I am now ready to compute. Now, if I will compute for the Albay now, it goes like this. So the community well-being of Albay is 0.6019. Remember, perfect well-being, the perfect well-being should be 1. 1 is our dream to have. So Albay is 0.6. What is that? Let's move on. For Bohol, it's 0.5755. So, but what is that? Reaching that point now. In Leyte, it's 0.605. So if you will compare the 3, you will tell me that Albay 0.660 and Leyte has 0.605. So you will say, well, better pala ang Leyte. But depende pa rin yun. Alright, so if I have show that in 1. So that's the case. Albay is for volcanic eruption. Bohol is for the recent, the strong earthquake that we had. And then Leyte was for the super typhoon, Yolanda, that we had. Right, so what all of those values now? So I'm coming up with the values like 0.81. You have to reach 0.81 to be more or less interpreted as very strong to a perfect one, and so on. So 0.61. So if we go back, if Albay has 0.60 and Bohol has 0.57, okay, so umabot ba sila? Strong lang, right? And Bohol has a moderate community well-being. Now you will tell me now, what is that? After learning all these values, what are those for? Now remember, these are policymakers because we want to concoct, we want to propose or come up with a program that would help our community being devastated by disaster. So if you see that your community is still having that moderate, still not so good, it's just like if you have 100 points and you get only half of it, diba? You're below the median, so it's not really good. So we want to go higher and higher, so on. So this is the qualitative category of that index. So you would ask me, what would be my basis? Remember, we also have some people who would look at using 100. 100, and you have 5 criteria there, and then you have to divide that by 5. So it's the same.
If you want to get 100, if you want to use 100, it's still the same. If you want to use 1, I'm using 1 as my highest index. Yes, I'm using also that. Alright, so let's look at now, these are the dimension values. Now we go closer. If you look at albi, so these are the things, these are the capitals that help albi to have that kind of community well-being index. Now if you look at that, so what's the highest here? It's the socio-cultural capital. And if you look at the natural capital, it's 0.056. So very, very low. Remember, I was using the forest coverage for looking at the values with the natural capital. So we miss all those forests there. Now let's look at Buot. What is the highest for Buot? It is again the socio-cultural capital. And the natural capital again is very, very low. Now what's the third one? For Leyte. Let's look at Leyte. What's the highest here for Leyte? It's the socio-cultural capital. So you see? And then it's a natural capital again that is very low. Now, you would also tell me, you might also be telling yourself now, because social culture is very important. You know, you have this trust that somebody will help you. You have your family, you have your friends, right? So they're very, very, very strong with that. Well, Filipinos are very positive, you know, when it comes to people who would help us. But how strong would be our political institution? Or how strong would be the other capitals in our community? So this is now the case where policymakers or the political leaders would look up. So where is the best one? Okay, maintain that or improve that pa. And then where's the lowest? We do something there. So this is how the value now of those values. It's just very easy. It's so easy for the leaders to easily say, okay, perfect pala, okay na, okay, or kulang pala. So I'm now reaching the conclusion and recommendation. It's very, very short. So preparedness, the culture of disaster preparedness should be always there. Of course, we know that disasters are coming. So we know that we have to prepare. So after that, emotional preparedness should also be taken part of. So it is best examined as CWB as to its dimension needs improvement. Yes, as I mentioned. And because natural capital has very, very low, I think we also have to look at it. Now, it's so easy if we have a perfect natural environment. I think we don't have so much problem. For example, the kind of viruses that we have, for example, like the mosquitoes that we have, why do we have all of these things when in fact, like 20 years ago, 50 years ago, we did not have that? Why? Because we're cutting all out of the trees. So where would the mosquitoes go? It would come to us, right? So we're actually part of this big problem. Right? So I would like to acknowledge the graciousness of this institution. Without CIRCA, I would not be able to finish my dissertation. And I also had EHRGP, the Education Institute, for my three-year study, leave of study, and also the UPLB Faculty Development Program. And also, I also have some persons to thank, like my statistician, Ms. Karen Bordios, and of course my academic committee. Dr. Cardenas was so helpful, very patient. Ma'am Nelson was very informative, was very helpful in improving the things that I was presenting to them. And Dr. Kimbo and Ma'am Dizon. Ma'am Kimbo was a friend and also like very clearly headed in giving me suggestions. Also Ma'am Dizon too, like helping me how to polish it. And of course, without Dr. Camacho, the Dean of the Graduate School, I might not be able to finish my PhD because it was him who encouraged, it was his voice who encouraged me to, okay, I have to finish this. And of course, Ma'am Teta Quaresma. Ma'am Quaresma also was the head of our professorial chair committee in our college, where I had my first professorial chair. And I think she was a factor in me coming up with awards. And of course, my department, and I have one of my colleagues from our department, Assistant Professor Rona Monticago, and also my friends like Dr. Lily Pintor was very helpful in the with a cup of coffee, we have this conversation, what to do and how not to do it. And of course, Sir Sonny was very, very helpful. Thank you, sir. Okay, so that's it.